Did I start it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. This webinar is held by Nebraska Department of Education World Languages and Chinese Language Teacher Association US Small Interest Group K-12. And this is our 8th webinar, and we have Heather today with us. First, I would like to introduce Nebraska Department of Education World Languages. Our mission is to empower educators to engage students in the authentic use of world languages via standard-based instruction to fulfill a range of functions, from expressing personal needs to communicating in the workplace, and to establishing strategic relationships across cultures so that they may learn, earn, and live.
Hi, this is Xiaoqing Liu. I represent CLTA SIG K-12. So CLTA is a Chinese Language Teacher Association in Indiana, and SIG representing the special interest group for K-12. So we are working together. We're honored to work together with Dr. Liu for this series of lectures. The special interest group of K-12 classroom and a methodology will create a professional platform to connect the K-12 Chinese teachers, from which they could update and refresh their Chinese classroom teaching skills and enrich their Chinese pedagogy and methodology. And today we are so happy and honored to invite Heather Switzer for today's talk. And her talk will be on content-based learning in language classrooms.
And we would like to introduce 4 more webinars in this series, which will coming soon. The next one is by Mr. Lee Perez, our Nebraska Teacher of the Year. He's going to present on culturally responsive strategies to use with English language learners. And he's going to present on October 15th, Saturday from 10 to 11:30, sorry. And that's me. I'm going to present with Dr. Nick Ziegler. We're going to present something we did during the summer. We had a group of teachers create materials, self-assessment materials based on Nebraska World Language Standards that would help teachers to implement language standards in their teaching. So we have cognition. That means we are using cognition to lead the implementation of standards. So pretty much we are using can-do statement to lead students through self-assessment and goal setting. So it's about Nebraska standards, but Nebraska standards is based on Act 4 standards. So there are similar strategies. If you're interested, please come. It's next Wednesday from 3:45 to 5:15, the same time, October 19th.
And next is Dr. Fei Yu will present on the use of multi-modality in world language classrooms, and her presentation will be between 10 to 11:30 Central Time on October the 29th. And after that will be Oha Tai Terinko, and her presentation will be on interactive online instructions in a flipped Russian classroom. And her presentation will be on November the 12th between 10 and 11:30 Central Time.
Thank you, Professor Liu. And here is a QR code if you are interested in becoming one of our presenters in the spring 2023. Yes, the spring guest speaker series. Please scan the QR code and I will contact you. Thank you. And all the recordings will be ready on the webpage in a week. So this QR code is actually Nebraska World Language, Nebraska Department of Education World Language webpage, and we have a page for guest speaker series. So if you scan this code, you will find our webinar ready in a week. Recordings. Yeah, thank you. And Heather.
Yeah. Okay, let me introduce today's presenter, Heather Switzer, and she is ACTFL's 2022 Language Teacher of the Year. And Heather Switzer received her MA in Arabic at Ohio State in 2012. Originally from Minneapolis, Minnesota, she joined the Army in 1998 and learned Arabic at the Defense Language Institute, becoming an Arabic interpreter. Experiences with languages in the US government inspired her to become a language instructor, focusing on intercultural competence as a core part of language fluency. Currently, Heather teaches beginning through advanced Arabic at the University of New Mexico and is one of the co-creators of the wecanlearnarabic.com website. Okay, let's welcome Heather Switzer for today's talk.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And thank you for everybody coming. Thank you to everybody who might be watching later on the recording part. I know we're all busy and none of us, I've never met a single teacher who says, oh, I just have so much time, I don't know what to do with myself. And that's not any of us. So thank you for sharing your time with me today. I'm going to share my screen to try to get my presentation up. Don't look too closely at my very busy desktop there. Here we go. Get to slideshow from current slide. There we go. Okay. So this talk today is about content-based learning. I'd like to again thank Nebraska Department of Education and also your special interest group for inviting me here today. It's really an honor to be here. So I want to thank everybody for the invite. This is something that's near and dear to my heart because for me, learning Arabic, we were not taught anything about Arab culture or what's appropriate or inappropriate to ask, or even gestures, so many things that go into communication, even learning about somebody's history or background or another whole part of the world. When I grew up in Minnesota, we really learned about America repeatedly. I couldn't have pointed to where the Middle East was on a map. And this created issues, I think, when we translate or when we're trying to work with another person. I might understand what they're saying, but that doesn't mean I can really comprehend that person. So content-based learning, I think, can help our students get there as well. So what we'll do today, hopefully, who am I? We'll define content-based learning. We'll do a case study, content-based learning in an advanced Arabic classroom, talk about the pros and cons, because I don't think there's any methodology that's perfect. We'll do some specific examples for a K through 12 classroom, and then Q&A, and if there's time, a brainstorming session together. So thank you for the lovely introduction. Who am I? I'd just like to say again, I teach now currently at the University of New Mexico. I was in the military, and this is me in Yemen eating some food, because that's how you eat food in Yemen. I didn't know that at the time, and I loved every second of being there. It was amazing. But I think more importantly, other than who I am, is who am I to be talking about content-based learning? What do I know about it? So in 2017, I was extremely fortunate to receive a scholarship to go to CARLA, which is the Center for Advanced Research on Language Acquisition at the University of Minnesota. And I spent a week with this fellow here, Laurent Camarada, and he's the expert in CBL, not me. Just because I've been using it a lot I don't know. I think the word expert gets thrown around a lot. But so I spent a week with him from like 8 in the morning to 5 p.m. With other people too, as we really delved into content-based teaching and learning and what that means. He's the editor of this book, Content-Based Foreign Language Teaching. curriculum and pedagogy for developing advanced thinking and literacy skills. So we're going to be condensing that week into this 1 hour, hopefully, and get a little bit of a taste of it. So everything that's good comes from him, and every mistake I've made comes from me. I just want to give credit to him where it's due. So I want to say also too, it's more commonly known as content-based instruction, CBI, or content-based language teaching, CLBT. And this is something that you might hear more often is CBI. So this is my question sometimes, is when I have to constantly ask myself, what's the intended goal of a language classroom? Is it a lesson? Is it a product? Is it happy students? Is it a happy instructor? Is it language gains? I mean, what's the overall goal of language? And so this is what we think about when we craft curricula, when we draft lesson plans. I teach Arabic. Do I want people to know the language, to master a grammatical structure, or learn how to communicate? Do I want them to know more about the culture, more about their own culture as we're delving into this? I used to ask students when I first started teaching, what culture do you come from? What's your cultural background? And I was really surprised that so many students wrote none. Like you can't not have a culture. But so many Americans, especially in the military where I originally taught, that we're sort of taught in some ways that our culture is the default, and culture is sort of synonymous with foreign somehow. And a lot of our students, I think, come in with this kind of idea, or like they don't have an accent, especially in the Midwest. There's this idea that Midwesterners don't have an accent, but no, everybody has an accent. It's like typing without using a font. We all have one. So sort of addressing these core issues, I think, is important. So with all this in mind, let's get some audience participation. What does a successful lesson look like to you? You can type in the chat if you want to. I'm not looking for a specific answer. This is for everybody here. If you've had a great day, how do you know? Students are engaged. I think this is important. I admit I put helping pictures up here. What else does it look like? Anybody want to share? A lot of interaction. I agree. I try to make it so my students are talking 80% of the time and I talk 20% of the time, and try to keep things like this. No drama from students. That would be lovely. Yes, this happens. Sometimes it's unavoidable. And it makes me uncomfortable sometimes during webinars like this because it's the opposite of what we preach. It's just me talking, and we all talk about that's not really learning, but then what are we doing during webinars? So I like to do Q&A sometimes right in the middle. Students feel that they accomplish a lot. I'm so glad you shared this because we think sometimes they're doing very well, but how do the students feel? Have they been frustrated the whole time? I mean, we see that we're pushing them and they're producing language, but do they want to like sprint out of the classroom at the end of the day? We want students to feel good about what they've done too. Achieving the objective of the day. Yeah, and that looks like a lot of different things. How do we know that they've achieved it? We can tell. That's a whole other webinar, I suppose. These are some really great ideas. I think sometimes it's important to go back and think to ourselves, what does success look like? Sometimes some days, if all of my students laugh at least once, I feel like it's a good day. So most of my classes anyways use backward design based on Ackfield's can-do statements. So I choose a can-do statement like I can introduce myself, or I can meet a new person, or I can rent an apartment, getting a little bit deeper. I can debate the legalization of cannabis in my state. They just legalized it here in New Mexico, and they also just legalized it in Lebanon. So we were comparing, economic systems and, everything else, all the cultural load that goes along with this. I wouldn't do this in K through 12 for the record, but it's up to you and your school. But even with backward design and focusing on a can-do statement like this, for me, sometimes one of my issues, I get so focused on the process of lesson planning and designing a curriculum, I forget about the product. Or worse, I assume the product in class is a lasting product. I see a successful classroom and I think, great, I've done a good job. The students have learned something. But I think we've all faced this. We've had students who do so well in a class, they've achieved the objective, but then a week later, they can't do it. Because there's a multiple breakdowns that happen sometimes. So this is why I like to use the term content-based learning, not content-based instruction, because the focus shifts to the students and what they're doing and not the curriculum that I'm creating. And I think for me, I need to be constantly reminded of this. It's about what the students are learning. It's not about what I'm teaching. I'm not to say I'm some kind of megalomaniac always thinking about myself, but again, when we focus on the lesson, sometimes it's, am I hitting the goals? But no, really, what are the students learning? And it's kind of, as they say, 6 of one and half a dozen of the other. And maybe I'm just muddying the waters here, but for me, I prefer the term content-based learning. But if you want to look up more later, you might want to look up content-based instruction. So here's the next question. What is content-based learning? Does anybody know? Or is that what you're here to find out today? And I see you, Crystal, by the way, focusing on students. Yes, I think it's important. Based on the silence, I mean, we're on Zoom, so it's going to be kind of silent anyway. But do we really know what content-based learning is? Here's the issue, one of the biggest issues. There's really not one clear definition. And so even the word content has changed meaning in our field. So when we talk about content, what are we talking about? Is it the vocabulary lists? Is it the grammar? This is the school that I came from, was very much vocabulary based, grammar translation based. This is what we did. And that was the content, was the language. Or is it the subject matter, like learning about art, like particular people in an art class? Are we learning about that and using language to communicate those thoughts and ideas? Or is it the language? Like what is even content? It can get a little sticky. Is it the textbook? So many of our programs, I think, are just, get to chapter 5 and that's our curriculum. So what is content-based learning again? Here's one definition: an empowering approach which encourages learners to learn a language by using it as a real means of communication from the very first day in class. So it's shifting the focus to communication, turning students into independent learners so they continue the learning process outside of the classroom. So one of the most valuable pieces of advice I used to talk to students in English when they came to the classroom. How's it going? How's your day? What are you doing this weekend? I'm gonna have some fun. Oh, it's your birthday. And then the bell would ring and I'd be like, okay, now's the time for Arabic. No, it shouldn't be just, class time is Arabic time or class time is language time. It should be a lifelong journey and extending beyond the walls of our classroom or that time period. So similar to the communicative approach, I think, when I first read this, a means of communication and focusing on communication skills, but it's not really the same. It's more of a philosophy than a methodology in many ways when we talk about content-based learning. So it empowers learners really through curiosity and wanting students to know more. Oh, I meant to change this slide. I'm kind of grossed out by this picture. But in any case, the idea is we communicate and we learn from each other. Taking the idea that content equals the subject matter and learning about the subject matter, not the language. And that is what's driving the curriculum. And language production, the idea is that language production naturally follows. Because the idea is we really want, let's say we really want to talk about art and we say we really like this piece, we want to delve into it. What makes this good? Why do I like it? Can I produce something like it? Why or why not? To communicate about that, we have to use the language. So the idea is that it empowers learners, again, through curiosity by instilling the sense of curiosity about them. So I ask these questions: what information is out there in Arabic or your target language or Chinese or anything about a particular topic? It just isn't there in English. It hasn't been translated. We don't talk about it in English for whatever reason. What's out there? This simply inspires curiosity about the world. This creates an internal feedback loop of wanting to know more. And the only way to really know more is to know more languages, and specifically the language that you're teaching. So by selecting things and ideas and thoughts and content that is not existing in English, or maybe not as prevalent, it really excites students. So I say sometimes, use FOMO. Yeah, please, you can interact anytime you want to. If you want to unmute yourself, I'm checking chat too. So FOMO, what is this? It's the fear of missing out. The idea is, what are you missing out on by not knowing the target language or by being monolingual? Not saying our students are monolingual, of course. A lot of our students come into the classroom, especially in New Mexico, already bilingual. But what else don't they know? You've got to find out. Who aren't you meeting? Who's not your friend now because you don't? I mean, just by sticking to certain languages. I think this might be a little manipulative, to be honest with you. Try to manipulate your students into thinking they might be missing out. Maybe. but anything that we can to help grab students' interest, I think, which can be in short supply some days, it can be useful. So language, the idea of language in general, George Orwell, famous author, once said, good prose should be transparent like a window pane. So writing or language shouldn't draw attention to itself. It should be a clear medium for conveying meaning. And this is where we want students to get with our target language eventually. That's our hope, is that they're no longer focusing so hard on what they, what is the meaning of spoon in Arabic, or how do I say I want water, what's that word again? We just want to communicate that thought. So getting to the point where we can communicate these thoughts and making our language like a window pane is our goal. And CBL can help us get it there, content-based learning. So to start your content-based learning journey, what I like to tell people is choose a topic or essential question of interest. It must be age appropriate. I've made this mistake and I push students just a little bit too far, I think, sometimes. So to let people know, I do teach at the university throughout the year, but I also teach at a local high school, Arabic here. And I teach elementary, middle school, and high school in the summertime as well. So sometimes I get confused and I think that this will be great for my middle school students, and it was not. So this is something to keep in mind. And it's got to be interesting to the students, not necessarily to the instructor. I mean, it seems obvious when we say it out loud, right? Of course. But things that I think are really, really interesting might not be interesting to our students, and vice versa too. Things we think are interesting to our students, kids change so fast these days. Like look at the Among Us. Everybody liked Among Us a lot. And then once we finally got a lesson plan up about it, nobody was playing it anymore. So we got to be careful and make sure we choose something that's interesting and also lasting. But also something that has multiple facets and can be discussed superficially, but also deeply, because we have students of all different varieties, I think, and levels of language. Even in the very first class on the very first day, you have students who pick stuff up very, very well, and other students who get confused easily, for whatever reason, or seem to get confused. And so something that can help differentiate is great. So if we want to get very, very specific, like I talked about, discussing the legalization of cannabis, this is not something that can really be discussed superficially. So that might not be the best, content-based learning for a number of reasons. But art is a great topic because we can say simple things. I like this, she's wearing a green skirt. I like green, it's colorful, to really deeply of what is the deeper meaning of their relationship. They're holding hands. Does she really love him? I mean, all these things too we could talk about. We could even do what students are learning in other classes. So if we are in a sort of situation where we can collaborate with people who are teaching history or art or other things, and then that way students can see how can they use their Chinese or Arabic or anything else outside of that particular classroom and see how it goes into other subjects. That takes a lot of work and a lot of coordination though, just a fair warning. So it's great to talk about this kind of stuff. I'd like to specifically talk about, I say case study in quotations because I didn't get, IRB funding or did do official research on this. And so I can't, do official quotes, but my experience is using CBL in my Arabic classroom. It says it's advanced Arabic 301. I mean, we use that term loosely, I'd like to say. So here in this classroom, I've got a mix of heritage speakers, fluent speakers, people who grew up in the Middle East, started taking this class, and students who have been taking Arabic for just 2 years. So as you can already see, there's a huge range of levels here. So here's a quick chart. We may have seen this before from the Foreign Service Institute. How long does it take to learn a language for a native English speaker? This is focused on native English speakers because this is the Foreign Service Institute and it's a US-based place where most of us speak English. So it's a little skewed towards native English speakers. But does anybody know how long it takes for to learn Spanish? About how many hours? To become fluent, I should say.
2 years about.
About 2 years. How many classroom hours do we know?
I don't have that number.
I mean, who does really? I looked this up because I thought, my students are supposed to be advanced. What's going on here? They're nowhere near advanced after 2 years of Arabic. Am I a bad teacher? I had these questions. Anyways, so they separated out into categories, the Foreign Service Institute. Can anybody hear my fridge, by the way? It's making a buzzing noise. Just gonna unplug it. Okay, sorry about that.
No, okay. I did not hear any noise from it.
Thanks for letting me know. I just unplugged it. It was buzzing. Anyways, to get back to this. So category 1, which is considered the easiest one, like French Spanish, it's about 600 hours, 600 quality contact hours, I should say. In category 2, German is all by itself, 750 hours. And this is a rough estimate, by the way. It's not, once you hit that 750 mark, you know German. I mean, it's the majority of people will. And then category 3 is 900 hours, like Malay or Swahili, with there's reasons for this, like less complicated grammatical structures. So like semek, for instance, is fish, like more than one fish in Malay. So you just say the word twice and it's plural. And then you have 4, which is 1100 hours, which is like Russian and Greek. And then when we get up to languages like Arabic and Japanese and Chinese, it's category 5, which is 2200 classroom hours. That's a lot of hours. It's a lot. So for us, our students, and we teach what's called an intensive course. So we meet for 6 hours a week. Our students have had about 360 hours of Arabic by the time they get to advanced Arabic. That's it, 360 out of 2200. Are they really advanced? No, they can't. I mean, it's very, very hard to get there. And that's assuming everybody shows up to every class prepared, right? Which is not necessarily our students. Again, far short of 2200 hours. So I had this, two people on the couch sitting, like our native speakers of Arabic did not like to get paired with people who were non-native speakers of Arabic because they could not, they struggled to have a conversation sometimes based on the old methodology that I was teaching from. And so I was at a loss. I didn't know how to teach a class like this. How do I make it fair for students who are maybe intermediate level with students who are native speakers and have it somehow be equitable for everybody and keep everybody's interest. So it's not totally boring to people who already know all of this and not too hard to others. So CBL to the rescue. After I took this class, I felt like I'd found my secret way of dealing with this huge amount of differentiation. So by making the course about a particular subject, not the language, we're putting everybody more or less on equal footing. Yes, some people come to the class with more knowledge than others, but by focusing on that, not the language, people feel more comfortable. So no more vocabulary tests, no more grammar tests, no more language tests in general. It's all about the subject itself. Now native speakers are no longer bored in class because it's like another content class for them, content, culture, maybe learning history, something like this. And then also non-native speakers feel like they can contribute something to the class because they have knowledge that the native speakers maybe don't necessarily have. And then the grading, it's showing up and submitting work about the content. So it's not about, for instance, how many times did you decline this noun properly? Or, did you make a complete perfect sentence? Oh, you got this grammar thing wrong, I'm taking off a half a point. It's not grading like that at all. It's, did you come to class? Were you prepared as much as you could be? And you have an idea, I think, of where students are after the first week. And did they work to their fullest extent? Or not the fullest necessarily, but did they turn in something that was compatible with the level that they should be at? Maybe just a little bit more, pushing it above. So this is the subject that I chose for my content, Israel and Palestine. Yikes, this is the face I always make at the start of every semester. It comes from the Superman Action Comics, because this is not an easy subject to tackle, and I'm not going to pretend like it is. It's like walking a tightrope wire every day, because people come to class already having an opinion, already being pro one side or the other. There really is no in between. And there's no impartial material on Israel or Palestine. Not even the cuisine is safe. You can't even talk about food in this region without it becoming politicized. So here's just a couple of headlines I've grabbed: how food became a target of colonial conquest, and the truth about Israeli couscous and all of this. So there's everything we read is biased, everything. So this is based on my essential question is the danger of a single story. What are you missing by only having access to a single story? So I'm going to stop sharing here really quickly because I'd like to play a video. It's going to take like 3 minutes. It's in English, and I think it's important to play because I think it's important to show everybody sort of how I set up the course, I guess. Because sometimes there's a fear that we have that we can only stay in the target language. But I play this first. I play the longer one. It's like 20 minutes, and I play it in class. I'm just going to play this clip here for everybody today.
I would like to tell you a few personal stories about what I like to call the danger of the single story. I thought about this when I left Nigeria to go to university in the United States. I was 19. My American roommate was shocked by me. She asked where I had learned to speak English so well and was confused when I said that Nigeria happened to have English as its official language. She asked if she could listen to what she called my tribal music and was consequently very disappointed when I produced my tape of Mariah Carey. So after I had spent some years in the US as an African, I began to understand my roommate's response to me. If I had not grown up in Nigeria, and if all I knew about Africa were from popular images, I too would think that Africa was a place of beautiful landscapes, beautiful animals, and incomprehensible people fighting senseless wars, dying of poverty and AIDS, unable to speak for themselves, and waiting to be saved by a kind white foreigner. So that is how to create a single story. Show a people as one thing, as only one thing, over and over again, and that is what they become. I recently spoke at a university where a student told me that it was such a shame that Nigerian men were physical abusers like the father character in my novel. I told him that I had just read a novel called American Psycho, and that it was such a shame that young Americans were serial murderers. It would never have occurred to me to think that just because I had read a novel in which a character was a serial killer, that he was somehow representative of all Americans. And now this is not because I'm a better person than that student, but because of America's cultural and economic power. I had many stories of America. I had read Thailand, Updike, and Steinbeck, and Gateskill. I did not have a single story of America. I've always felt that it is impossible to engage properly with a place or a person without engaging with all of the stories of that place and that person. The consequence of the single story is this: it robs people of dignity. It makes our recognition of our equal humanity difficult. It emphasizes how we are different rather than how we are similar. Stories matter. Many stories matter. Stories have been used to dispossess and to malign, but stories can also be used to empower and to humanize. Stories can break the dignity of a people, but stories can also repair that broken dignity.
All right, and it's always a blurb to share this video, but the idea is that I played this for everybody because I really think it's important to set up what is the intention here. Why are we talking about this very delicate topic? Because it's really emphasizing again that I don't have an agenda. I'm not trying to push an agenda on anybody else, but really to try to reframe any narrative that we have in our lives whatsoever. What happens when we only hear one thing? And then also the larger picture, what happens if we only have access to information in just one language, hoping that this will spur students on to continue their lifelong journey. So we start also by co-creating a class contract, basically saying what's acceptable and what's not, what our goals are for the class, what do we want to learn, what don't we want to learn, maybe, that's always a good question too. And also my advice, if you want to do the same thing, is to keep it simple. Don't get into the weeds of exactly the topics to talk about or not, but the class contract, I mean, I think this is important more when we get into politics, and not necessarily for every topic, but just to remind students that they are the ones who are responsible also for their own learning as well. So what do they want to learn? And what do they expect of me as a teacher? Because so many times, especially at the university level, our syllabus is all about all the ways that you as a student can fail. And it really should be more about what do we want to get out of this course? And what is the student expectation of me also? And then we all sign it at the end, and it becomes sort of a co-creation experience. And then starting that class off again on a good setting. So we spend this semester reading a young adult novel. It's called Against the Tide. And the novel is from the point of view of a 15-year-old Palestinian girl living in the Gaza Strip. We do not pretend the book is unbiased. I don't shy away from that. So when we read this book in the past, because I'm not sure if this is, I'm sure actually it's probably the same way with Chinese or with other less commonly taught languages, to push students up into the area where they can read novels is very hard. It's a huge jump. And it's hard to bridge that gap. So also too, it's hard to get our hands on novels that are accessible to us, that we can actually purchase, that have a USB code or all these other things. So this is one of the books that's actually accessible. And so we read it while also looking for the bias and also this idea of what is the single story present in the book. So we also pick out these plot points and we discuss those as well. So here's some more specific examples. So there's somebody, Rachel Corey, she's mentioned in this book. So we spend a week, we watch a video about her life and find out who she was, because the author of the book expects people to know who she was. And I find Americans do not. So there's this herb Zatar, it's mentioned. So we watch a video about Zatar. It claims Zatar cures every illness, including cancer and COVID, which is, I mean, of course not true, but, you know, but then we watch the video and sometimes it's nicer to sort of take a step back because food is less controversial. We can find the bias there too. Smoking shisha is mentioned. So we watch a video about the dangers of smoking and smoking shisha in particular, and then we talk about that as well. Again, and I always remind students, I'm not trying to force people to not smoke or anything like this, but we also learn then a higher level language skill of expressing opinions, debating, all of these things too, while, you know, having this book to grab onto, but not always necessarily the more serious topic of Israel's right to exist. The fishing rights of Palestinians is a major plot point. So we watched videos discussing the issues of fishing off the Gaza Strip. And I'm from Minnesota, so I could talk about fishing all day, but you know, a lot of students don't. But sometimes it's nice to see this other aspect too. Who has rights to water? This is not something I think that many Americans are familiar with, this idea that I can't just go fishing in my local stream, that it's blocked off by others. We also bring in community partners. So it's not just me speaking, not just some, you know, a white girl from Minnesota who's not Israeli and not Palestinian. So there's a rabbi here in New Mexico. He's the first rabbi to be, the first Spanish rabbi, I should say, since the Inquisition. And this always shocks people because there's this idea that, you know, this sort of thing was far in the past. The Inquisition was in the 1400s, but no, this sort of anti-Semitism has existed in Europe for that long. And he speaks Arabic. We also work with the Hillel House. Oh yeah, rabbis from the local community. Q&A with a Shia Muslim who lived at the Hillel House. Hillel House is the Jewish house on many campuses. And we have Shabbat dinner at the Hillel House. And a lot of this is, you know, what do you call it? Voluntary. I don't force students to go. But sometimes it's enough just to meet another person and hear their story and listen to what they have to say. And this really opens up students' eyes a little bit more because, again, we want students to learn our language, but really what we're trying to do is expand their worldview and keep them more open. So we just had Shabbat dinner last week, but on Friday, actually, and we had the Muslim Student Association come in as well. And all of us were talking and learning new words in different languages, and it was a really lovely thing. When you start eating with other people, there's something about food, I think, that brings people together in ways that nothing else does. So all this is to say, there's some pros to all of this approach. I found that students are very, very hungry for this information. Most students have only heard a single story about this conflict, if they've heard anything at all. And so in the past, we've always kind of ignored it because it's a very sensitive topic, Israel and Palestine. And so if we have like a map of the Middle East, what we'd do is we'd like just post a picture over Israel and Palestine because we didn't want to show a map and just, you know, have people like dancing or something. And this never sat right with me because I don't think that ignoring it is going to solve any issues. Not that I'm pretending that we're solving the conflict here in Albuquerque, but you know, to ignore it is also to do a disservice to the Palestinians and Israelis and the Jewish population in our community. Even Palestinians and Israelis always learn something new from the course, because we do get into different aspects and ideas and literature and things that they may not have heard. So there have been in the past Palestinians and Israelis in the same course together, and they sit on opposite sides of the room and never agree with each other. And then, but as slowly as time goes on, I'm not saying they're becoming best friends or anything, but I did have 2 students who really did not like each other at the start of the semester, just based on who they thought the other person was. And by the end of that same semester, they were studying together, which is a huge leap, I think, in so many ways. And it just shows the importance of what content-based learning can really bring to the classroom. People are not bored anymore because it's always something new. And even if it's the same topic, you know, we can change it just a little bit. And so it's not like, oh, I already know all this, I'm a native speaker, just let me leave, you know. Or on the other hand, you know, the students who go to the bathroom for a half an hour because it's so far above their level that they feel uncomfortable. This is not an issue. Students also feel inspired to learn more. And this is the magic that happens. It's not always in Arabic. I'm not going to pretend that it is, but they do go out then and do more research about the topic. And then they start to find out, hey, I do want to know more about this, but this isn't accessible to me in English. I have to read about this in Arabic. And most importantly, I have not lost sight of this. We're all language teachers in our core, right? This is what we want to learn. So language levels do increase quickly because students want to be able to participate. They want to jump in the discussion. They want to ask questions. They want to answer questions, and they want their voice to be heard too. And so by choosing a topic like this, it really pushes students in ways that I found that the carrot and stick of grading and exams don't, because again, it's the curiosity that inspires. And I think there's a huge potential also for diversity, equity, and inclusion in the classroom as well. I think we've all seen this picture, with like we have equality where everybody's got the same access, but equity is giving people more access who need it. And then, we have sometimes inclusion, sometimes you'll see that as justice or liberation. What's the wall even doing there? And then a sense of belonging too. You have everybody who's they're actually now playing the game themselves and wearing the uniform. So if we create a classroom where we're talking about the content, especially for people who have so many different levels, we can really go a long way too. The thing about diversity, equity, and inclusion is it's a huge buzzword right now, I think, in language teaching and in everything else. And yet I don't feel I haven't seen a lot of evidence of language teachers being given the tools to implement anything in the classroom. And I'm not sure if you feel the same way. There doesn't seem to be very concrete steps that we can take in order to increase the sense of belonging, other than, don't be racist or whatever. That's not enough. We have to do more, but there's no clear pathway. I think that there's so many now, it's become more clear to me in my classroom through content-based learning, all the different pathways that I can take to increase these ideas of diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, everything else in the classroom, and sort of widen students' perspectives. Because that's what that's all about. That's what DEI is all about, in my opinion. Which isn't to say, again, there's not some cons to this whole system of content-based learning. Some cons that I've noticed is that students do get a little tired towards the end of the semester. I'm not going to say they get bored, but there are some days where they're like, I just don't want to debate this anymore, even if it's about herbs or a dish or food or fishing or, kind of only tangentially related. Can we please talk about something else? That kind of thing. That can happen if you stretch it out over 16 weeks. There still is a perceived unfairness about the level of work involved, in the sense that if we're reading a novel, for some students, this is hard and it's really pushing their skills and their abilities. And for others, they read it on the way to the classroom because it's a young adult novel and they can flip through it pretty quickly. And so the way that I combat this is I tell the students, okay, don't you have to take an English class or a literature class to get through college? That is a core requirement. And they're like, yeah. And I said, did you ever stand up for the people in your class who are not native English speakers for whom that book is really, really hard? Did you ever say anything about that? And they're like, oh, no, I've never heard anybody who's even thought about that. So I said, listen, you're here to learn Arabic, and that is your goal. And it doesn't matter how many other native speakers there are out there. Are you learning? Yes, you are. And are you debating? Yes, you are. And is your language skill increasing? Yes, it is. And you're getting so much more out of this class as a result. So this is how I try to mitigate this. I would like to say there's easier subjects to tackle. So I'm talking about, Israel and Palestine. This is a subject I sort of felt everybody in Zoom gonna go like this, like really, it's not an easy subject. And there's no language that doesn't have some kind of issue going on with it, or history, or country or location or anything else that maybe we kind of avoid. But sometimes it's worth tackling, I think. There's lots and lots and lots of prep work involved in this too. If you want to start your own content-based learning journey, don't give up. Because for me, it gets better and better and better every year, but the front loading of it, trying to find a topic, trying to find you're crafting your whole curriculum all by yourself a lot of times. And that can it can be really hard to try to find good materials that are accessible. And so for me, I'm telling you, it gets easier and easier every year. Every year I find new things that are better. Every year it gets better. I had a professor once tell me, and now I'm telling everybody, anything worth doing is worth doing poorly. And I did not understand what he meant, because I thought, you're lazy. That's what I heard. What do you mean doing poorly? But the idea is that every time we start something new, we're not gonna be very good at it at first. That's just the reality. The first time I tried to teach this class did not go well. And partially it's because I didn't address the biases properly. But as I learned how to do it better and better, and learned how to really tackle these subjects a little bit better every year, it did get better and better. But the first year is not necessarily, it's not gonna be perfect. Nothing is. So divest yourself of this. It's worth doing, and it's even worth doing poorly. It really is. So yeah, start thinking on that early. Yeah, I think it's a good idea. And also, this is something too. If depending on what topic we choose, it does require a certain level of Arabic or language to participate. So if we pick a topic that's too hard, some students will get left behind, and they will feel the sense of frustration. The native speakers take over the classroom, and then you've got the same issue you had in the past. I'm not assuming you did, but that could happen where we have so many different levels. We have some students who are really, really into it and others who are not. So we've got to make sure that no matter what we choose, it's going to be at the appropriate level for everybody to be able to participate, even those students who didn't work on their homework or maybe aren't progressing as we'd like them to. If there's ways that we can create something, again, just describe this painting, everybody at some point can say, I hate it, and then people get into it more. So specifically, again, for K through 12 teachers, I wouldn't necessarily go into Israel with kindergartners, right? I mean, of course not, or elementary school students, or even our high school students necessarily. I mean, it depends on the culture and the classroom you're in. So for me, I have piloted some content-based learning things in the K through 12 setting as well. I taught in Star Talk for many years, which was for us middle school through high school, Albuquerque Academy, which is middle school through high school, Concordia Language Villages, which is elementary through high school. So this is where this is coming from. So let's talk food, everybody's favorite subject. We all have food units, I think, right? We talk about favorite foods, maybe recipes, cook at home, maybe we'll make a menu, we'll have a pretend restaurant in class, they're all great. But maybe let's flip this and make an essential question. What does the world eat in a week? And what inequalities then exist as a result of this? And that's an admittedly leading question because I'm assuming there are inequalities, but there really are. And so asking this, there's better ways to ask it maybe, so that we want the students to notice the inequalities instead of us saying, what are these inequalities? Get them to see them and bring them up somehow instead of tease it out of it. What does my family eat in a week? Work on a project like this. So food, again, maybe a better question is, what does a family eat in a week? Because we have some students who are food insecure and they might not want to advertise this to everybody else. So we did a project where we worked on something. It was, let's see here, do I have that? Yeah. We looked at what a family ate in a week, and then they went home and they documented it throughout the week. But I also said too, I've got like the Avengers here, like you can make a pretend family. Like, what do you think the Hulk would eat in a week, for instance, if they didn't want to talk about their own food issues at home, because this can be sensitive. And then another question is, does food stop at the border? Do we stop eating falafel in Morocco, which is right down here, and then start eating paella when we move from Morocco to Spain? I mean, of course not. So I've got an image here of Europe, because so much of what we do is based in this European model where you have one nation equals one culture equals one language. And this idea that you speak French in France and Spanish in Spain and Romanian in Romania. But what's more obvious when you get there is these borders are fluid and the cultures are fluid. And you don't suddenly start wearing, lederhosen when you go to Germany or something like this. I mean, we have Chinese culture here in the United States, and these things are more fluid and the borders are not as defined as we pretend. So we can get the students to be more, have a wider view of everything in this sense. And so here's a time, let's see here. No, I can't. I'm just going to escape out of this. I'd like to share this link with everybody in case you want to use it for later. I'll put it in the chat. This is something that you can buy, the overly priced book. I think it's overly priced, What the World Eats in a Week. But if you go to this website, it also shows you too, like you can grab a screen, what do you call it? Like a snip. So here we have a family in Chad, and it even talks about the money they spend each week on food and what their favorite foods are. And then here's a family from the United States and the food expenditure for 1 week and what they eat and their favorite foods. A lot of people say there's a real push to only focus on your target language and your target culture. I respectfully disagree with this. Even though I teach Arabic, we do look at what the world eats. What do they eat in Myanmar? What do they eat in Spain? What do they eat in Iran? There are Arabic speakers everywhere. There are Arabic speakers right here in the United States. And so why not show and compare in all of these things? I think this is really important. So this link that I shared with you, you can grab this, and then students then have to describe the foods a lot, a little. We can talk about nutrition. We can talk about maybe, again, inequalities, I think they're visually obvious and clear. And so we can get into the language aspects of, the adjectives and the descriptions and all of these things as well. And then there's also, like, let's talk houses, for instance. So we've got here this website, it's Gapminder Dollar Street. And so I don't know if anybody's heard of this website. Anybody at all? It's a super cool website. And so I'm just going, whoops, I didn't mean to totally stop sharing. I see you there in the chat. I'm going to escape out of this and pull up, not this one, but just let's do a very, very quick tour. So, and also I should put this in the chat. Dollar Street is a super great, really great website. And so what you can do is you can see the families and you can sort of, versus how much are they making in a month to how, rich and poor and everything else. If you click on this, you can look at like specifics, like the beds, the floors, like what the hands look like even. All topics, drying dishes, earrings, favorite home decorations. I lead my students, I don't get so specific with them. I lead them to the world by income per month. And so you can look through and the, excuse me, the different countries. So we do, I admit, focus here more on Arabic speaking countries. What's interesting to me, I always point out to the students too, Palestine's here, but not Israel, which I think that's very interesting. I wish they had an Israeli part here too, so we could do some comparisons. But if we click on Egypt and go to OK, it'll show us like this group in Egypt. If we go to, we can click on multiple ones, like maybe Iran, Jordan, and Lebanon, and then hit OK. And then if you click on any one of these families, you can see what people make. Let's say, $832 a month in Lebanon. You can go through pictures, and it's just like, what do the people look like? And there's also information about here. You can scroll down and it looks like their teeth, their makeup, which a lot of people are really interested in. So it's not just any more about the housing plans, but really the specifics of what their shoes and spices look like, the street view, the kitchen. And so you can see, I think already maybe we're getting some ideas of how we can incorporate something like this in our own classrooms, because you do have students who can then do a whole presentation on a family and really just get into describing it. And then other students who might get really, really specific, and some who might back off and just be like teeth, hands, like that kind of thing. And then we can assign different, what do you call it? Projects to students. They have to compare between families. They choose a country and they have to give that presentation to somebody else, or a presentation in between countries, like all the families in Tunisia. Then we can even see too here, like it might not seem like this, a lot of these families make a lot of money, but compared to the world, sure. And this has helped break down a lot of stereotypes for my students who tend to think of Palestinians and Mexicans and other people who are not American as being extremely poverty ridden. And that is not the case. I mean, not always, of course, you have poor people everywhere. But this again helps break students out of that mold of seeing people in just one way. And it can really help also get students excited about description words and describing things. And then it could help describe their own house more if they want to, or learn how to describe. I always then too, after we get off of Dollar Street, like now pick a house that maybe your favorite influencer. If students are really, really into, TikTok, there's always like descriptions of houses. So I'll have students, do a voiceover of their house, but in Arabic. Do your own house if you want to, but again, that can be a little tricky because we don't want students to have their own inequalities on display either necessarily. So again, and I didn't put a slide up for this. Some people say that you shouldn't use Dollar Street because it's not in the target language. Again, I respectfully disagree. Some people say it's not authentic, and we can only use authentic materials because authentic materials have been defined as by native speakers of your target language for native speakers of your target language. And this is in English. But the power of the image is so huge and so important. And especially in this day and age where our students, I don't know if you've experienced this, but they have the attention span of ants and cannot control it's very hard to get them to look at a textbook. So these images that we're showing, here on Dollar Street are so powerful. And then to get students to then describe this and make those comparisons and all the language that comes in with this, colors and adjectives and what we think about it and how this makes us feel, and what they might be feeling, all of these things too. And then we have a larger view of what the world really looks like also, which cannot be understated. So again, here we are back at the beginning of our journey today. To start your content-based learning journey, choose a topic and essential question of interest. I used to start off with a topic like Israel and Palestine, but I found actually if I want to start this, an essential question is better. So not just food, but the essential question is what do people around the world eat in a week? And then if we want to get even deeper, what are the food inequalities worldwide? But that sometimes can get a little bit too big. So I find with the younger kids and the younger students, depending on, how your classroom is structured, if it's an intensive, like 6 hours a day summertime program, I find spending a week on a topic is good. If it's throughout the year, sometimes I think a month on a topic is good. So you can spend an entire month talking about food and then building up to a project at the end, which gets into project-based learning, which we all, I think, are maybe sort of familiar with. But starting with that essential question is huge. So again, reminder must be age appropriate. Don't do what I did. Interesting to students again. There are some things I think that are universally interesting. Some things not so much. I'll give you an example of music. I thought music was, the universal language, and that students would be really interesting in learning the lyrics to different songs. It turns out no, because they didn't like that kind of music. They just didn't like Arabic music. They didn't like Arabic pop music. And there was nothing I could, so I cut my losses that week, and I just decided to go more into depth in another subject because they weren't as into it as I thought that they would be. So again, if I want to say this too, if you've spent a lot of time on a unit and students aren't getting it and they're not happy, don't keep forcing it on them. Maybe think about changing it to, okay, you all kind of like this about Egypt, but let's talk more about something about Egypt that is more interesting to the students, because they have to have that interest. They have to get that dopamine rush in their brains, otherwise we've lost them. Again, a subject that has a lot of different facets, can be discussed superficially for the students who didn't prepare, as well as deeply for the students who did and who have a deeper language ability. Once we get into this differentiation, it makes for a much more lively classroom. And then it really inspires students because they realize, hey, I can talk about this, but I want to say more. And then that really inspires them to study at home in ways that maybe grades don't. So like art, again, what makes art good? We did an art unit one year and there's an online museum of bad art. I don't know if anybody's heard of this. It's called the Museum of Bad Art. And we debated this, like what makes this art bad? And is this even something that should be on display? Because I think that's why people don't make enough art, because we don't want people to make fun of us in such a way. And then, you can really dive down deep into these different questions. Again, what are students learning in other classes? So by tying what students are doing, this works better, I think, in middle school and some of these other classes than it does in college. So if they're all, doing a certain project in art, tie that into what you're doing too. It, again, takes a lot of work and coordination to do this. And sometimes it's just not possible because the person who's running the art department is not into the idea, or they're just a difficult person to work with in general. I think we've all had colleagues like this at some point. So don't try to force a round peg into a square hole when it comes to this kind of stuff. You can have great ideas, but it'll take buy-in from others as well. And then, it's let's say you've chosen your great topic, you have your essential question, you think the students are really interested and they're excited about it. You need to talk about grading, which is, I don't know anybody who loves grading, but this is what drives students a lot of times, and not just what you'll be grading students on, but how you'll be grading them. So we use an ungrading system. Has anybody heard of this before, ungrading? No, so I've got a screenshot up of our first year Arabic class. We got rid of like A- and A+ and all of that. It's just A, B, C, or D, and that's it. And okay, I see one person has heard of it. So the idea is that you either get credit for something or you get no credit for it. And if you come in late, you get like half credit. This can be dangerous, I think, sometimes in high school because, or, you know, some of these other places because attendance can be hard. But in college, one of our biggest problems is people just skipping class. And so we say, okay, listen, there are 75 days of class this year. You have to come 70 times. One of the hardest parts about this is that I have to know exactly how many assignments we have at the start of the semester. And that took a lot of work. But, you know, there's 125 assignments. If you turn in and get credit for 115 assignments, then, you know, you're at that A level. And then assessments, testing. And you either get credit or no credit. If I can kind of understand what you're saying and it's obvious you tried, you know, we'll give you credit. If it's unintelligible and you didn't prepare, you know, we'll kick it back to you. You say, no, you do not get credit for this. And you have to redo it to get credit within 2 weeks. And that's the same thing for the assignments as well. If a student does not complete the assignment or turns in something that was half completed or didn't answer all the questions, or something that we feel like, you know, the student was off, they can do better, we kick it back to them and we reassign it and say, you don't get credit. Here's why. Finish these things. We give people 2 weeks and turn it back in, and we'll give you full credit. I think that there's a lot of positives to this because in some ways it again levels the playing field for our students who are not native speakers, who maybe struggle, especially at the university level. Maybe they're food insecure, they have to work 2 jobs just to come to class. You know, they have a young baby or something. And so I can see they're working to the best of their ability, but they can still get an A. And they have a handle on things. And it also helps push people who are maybe slacking off or something, and, you know, just like, good enough, I'll turn it in. It's like, no, it is not good enough. Yeah, you have to at least answer everything. It doesn't have to be correct, like 100% correct or 100% perfect grammar, but we'll give you credit for it. But you've got to complete it. That's the kicker. I will say this semester, I don't know how well this is working because we have students who they don't see the percentages. They just see a series of ones. And so far they've got, you know, 30 out of 70. Like, oh, there's still plenty of time left at the end of the semester. I'm like, no, we have less than half left. And there's some people, I don't know if they can pass anymore because they've skipped so much class. They're not seeing that F percentage. And it's hard to fight against. So how many assignments in total? So it's 125 assignments. So we just give them 10 to like do whatever they want to with. So what we did is we cut off like the top 5%. We saw how many there were. I think it was 5% or something. And then we decreased it because everybody has an off day or a bad time or, you know, a doctor's appointment or something like this. And the other thing we do too, by the way, is we give students tokens. So we give people 5 extra points and they can put them wherever they want to at the end of the semester. So for instance, you know, it's like you can use 1 token to cover up a late. So you can change like your half point to a point, or you can use 3 tokens for a missing assessment. If you just skipped class that day or you didn't do a good job or you just don't want to or whatever else, or I think it's 2 tokens for assignment that you missed. And then we play games in class for tokens. So it's like extra credit. So some students, you know, we'll give like vocabulary quizzes sometimes. And if they finish it, or if they win Kahoot, we'll give them a token like that, this kind of thing. And the students can it's fun for them. Again, I don't want to pretend that this is a perfect system and that it's easy to set up. It's not. It takes so much work to set up your entire semester in advance and to know exactly how many assessments you have or assignments. Because I can tell you right now what we're going to be assigning on November 12th, but that took a lot of work. What if, for instance, your class is behind a little bit or they're just not getting it, or what you thought they thought they'd be somewhere and they're not quite there? The system is a little inflexible in that regard. As long as if you can maintain the same number of assignments and assessments, just make sure that, you know, it takes a while to polish. Let me just put it that way. So I think ungrading, this idea of credit and no credit, can push students and reduce stress in some ways. But the students, I thought it would really help the students who fail or are just right on that edge. The system is not working for them. And I think it's because there's a certain percentage of the population for whom they're only seeing how much they need to pass, and that's all they want to do. It's like the quiet quitting version of school. And so without seeing that, I think that they're not pushing themselves to be the students we know they all can be. So it's not perfect. Let me just put it that way. So again, then also to select your lessons. because now we've got our plan, our topic, our essential question. We've sort of got our semester over, with the can-do statements, teasing out things from the book. What topics, mini topics we want them to talk about. Now, how do we plan our lessons then? So here's where we don't want to lose focus of the fact that we're language teachers at our heart and soul. So we have to be intentional about language usage. So I don't know if you notice, like all the things I said, we watch a video about Rachel Corrie, we watch a video about Zato, we watch a video about fishing because they're reading a book at home. So bringing in this video and the listening aspect is really important. And even again, if you have one main focus like Israel and Palestine, it's okay to shake it up a little bit. So we can spend a week talking about romantic comedies because there's a little bit of romance in the young adult novel and people kind of like that. So we watch a rom-com from Lebanon, which is next to Israel and Palestine. Okay, fine, but students kind of appreciate that break of getting away from maybe the main topic. It's okay to do that too. So we're finished a little bit early today. This is like my crash course on content-based teaching, and learning, I suppose. I'd like to open it up to any questions anybody might have.
There's one teacher asked a question about your assignments and assessments, which is like how many they are.
Oh, right, assignments and assessments. So assignments, I'd have to pull this up exactly, but yeah, so what we did is we did like by percentages. So total assessments are about 40, but we only grade for 35, something like this. And so we do cut off some on the top and then also give out those tokens to make sure that students do have some wiggle room there too, because we all have our off days. But allowing students to turn in assignments and that kind of thing late is great. I was really worried that this would create a ridiculous burden on us as teachers to have to be constantly regrading things. It turns out it's not. It's actually a lot easier to grade this way because I'm not so focused on the nitty gritty of grammar and stuff and that kind of thing. So the question here too is, how do you teach language forms such as grammar and pronunciation? This is a great question. And so the idea and the hope is that students will pick up the grammar and the pronunciation merely by looking at it so much. The reality is that this is not how people learn. It's not going to happen, especially if we only have them for 1 hour a day. So what we do in class, so let's say in class, I have students read 2 chapters, and it's maybe like 6 or 7 pages. And then they have a specific assignment where they have to, how do you feel about this? And then they have to write it and they submit their homework and then they share it in class. And as they're sharing in class, I'm walking around and I'm listening to them and I'm taking notes, and students don't know I'm doing this necessarily. And so then I'll go and I'll stop the class and I'll say, hey, here's some things to look out for. And so then I teach the grammar thing and I teach pronunciation. And I'll say then, okay, now we're all going to do this little quick worksheet or, something like this. Let's run through these drills. I know we call it drill and kill, but sometimes I think drills have importance. And then we immediately use that same idea. And when we go back and then we start talking again, we have a new partner. And it's like, okay, now listen for this. And then I'll go around and start correcting students after we've done that little mini lesson in the middle. So we don't take off points for poor grammar. And the concern is always, then students aren't going to learn it. But the reality has been the opposite, actually, because students are less focused on the grammar and more focused on the communication. They inevitably do pick up these grammar things. If the grammar is so bad I don't understand it, I'll kick it back to students. And sometimes what we'll do too is I'll have it where I'll print off like common mistakes, and then and nobody, it's anonymous, so students, what they've submitted, then we'll do a workshop where we'll just correct the mistakes in sentences. So there's many ways to introduce grammar, but and pronunciation that don't make it seem so boring to students. Because I don't know any student who's inspired to know more Arabic because they know how to conjugate all the verbs, as an example. So by incorporating it into the lesson, and this is one of those things that I did poorly at first. It's getting better and better every single year, because I can see the common problems that students have. I see when they crop up, and I integrate it into the classroom, and we do it in the classroom together. Because grammar, I don't know if anybody else has found this issue. It's one of those issues where students at home study and they get really good at it, and then they go to class. And you have the contingent, there's always a contingent of students who do not study at home or don't do the homework or just are trying really, really hard and just don't understand it. And so when we do it in class together, it sort of evens that playing field just a little bit better when it comes to the nitty-gritty of languages. And so I see also this question here too, how many topics do you have in one school year? For university, we just have the one topic, which is Israel and Palestine, and the main focus of the danger of a single story, because we only meet 3 hours a week, and that's it. And so when I taught in Star Talk, we met 7 hours a day, and we did one topic a week, and we had weekly forms. At Concordia Language Villages, where people were living together, and it was supposed to be this total language immersion, content-based learning, I tried to get it working there. I couldn't get it off the ground because it was a too many cooks in the kitchen kind of a situation where too many people had their own ideas and wanted to do their own things. And I didn't want to say, hey, we're going to spend this whole week talking about food, because nobody else wanted to really do that. So if you're working with other people, you really have to get them on board with it. But when it comes to the topics, I would suggest taking a look at how many hours you have for contact hours. And so spending, I mean, I think a good round number is 40 hours on something, or even, because like, let's say you have 5 hours a week. That's more, actually, sorry, that's 20 hours. 20 hours is pretty good. So corrective feedback to students in both content and language. So we do workshops in the classroom. So let's say, for instance, students have to write a paragraph on, sometimes I'll make students, this is a better example. So in the book, the students, they read like the father and the daughter have a kind of complicated relationship, and the father yells at the daughter and she kind of like calms him down. And so then we have like, pretend you're this student and you have to write a letter to your father explaining your feelings. Like, how do you feel when he yells at you, and what do you think is the solution? And we find a lot of students actually appreciate this because they also have complicated, relationships with their own parents. And so that helps to get it out, but also in Arabic and pretending there's somebody else. But then of course, students will turn it in and it's not 100% accurate. So then what we'll do is I'll get the papers, I'll correct them, but I don't know if anybody else has noticed this. The biggest problem with homework is I'll exhaust myself correcting homework and I give it back to students and it goes immediately in the trash because they're looking at the grade and they don't look at the corrections. So then we'll workshop it in class a lot of times, and I'm intentional about who I pair people with. So I'll pair a stronger student with a weaker student. I don't tell them this. I don't like the term strong and weak, but just, language wise. And so then they workshop their letters together, and then they learn from the other person. And meanwhile, I'm walking around and I'm adding my own 2 cents in. And then students, then they have another topic too, that they'll have to write a reply together from the father to the daughter. And then those 2 students together are creating a letter, and students can get creative then. And I can say, you can be really mad. And then they're like, I want to know a curse word, or, and then I say, that's not appropriate. Like a father is not going to write a letter that's swearing at his daughter, but they're asking because they're curious and we're inspiring that curiosity. So this is how we give corrective feedback. They don't realize they're being corrected per se is the secret here, but they want to write like a great letter, and then they're going to present it in front of the class. So they all read their letters, and then we go over again, common mistakes all the way through. So I'm, again, as they're reading their letters to each other, I'm walking around, I'm listening, I'm taking notes. I write on a whiteboard and I say, hey, I heard this from somebody, or I've heard this from a lot of people. What's the problem with this sentence? Okay, now go back and fix it in your own letter. And so they're getting that feedback right then and there. They're correcting it right there. And most importantly, it doesn't go unread right into the trash. And here's the biggest secret of all, it's less work for us because we're doing it in the classroom. So we're not exhausting ourselves correcting these letters at home. And then they're using that feedback right away to create a new letter that's a reply, and they're working with somebody else. So they're not just sitting there in frustration, but they're actually co-creating some new meaning. And then observation of language retention without intensive practice of the language. This is a great question. And this is partially why I love content-based learning so much, because it does inspire that curiosity outside of the classroom. It is a depreciable skill. Arabic, Chinese, Spanish, any language, it's a depreciable skill. And if you don't use it, you lose it. This was for sure my experience. I'm not a native speaker of Arabic. And after I got out of the military, it's complicated, but it took me like 1.5 years before I got back into Arabic class again. And I lost a lot. And it was very frustrating for me. But it was easier the second time around. And I eventually got back into it too. And I think that language retention, I don't think we need intensive practice with it as much as we need quality, sustained practice. So what's more because we get students too who study abroad, and then they come back and they lose their study abroad abilities or what they gained overseas. And so using the ungrading system, one of the good parts about this is that it doesn't put all the pressure on the tests, because students study really hard for the test. They do okay, maybe they do really well, but then you get that brain dump problem because they cram so hard the day before, they lost it the next day. And so with this ungrading, again, sustained, it's like, okay, if you totally screwed up this one test, it's okay, you can redo it later. And it's just 1 point of credit anyways. So this sustaining of it all is what really helps students. But it depends on the student too. And what's more important even than intensive language practice is that desire. We have to instill that love and excitement and that dopamine rush that's happening in the brain. The fun of language learning and the fun of learning something new and the fun of going home and telling other people about it. And this is what sustains the language. So what other kinds of projects and assignments do I give to students? I do give a cooking assignment where students have to go and cook, and they have to write their own recipes from a beloved family recipe. And they have to make also ridiculous claims about the recipe, like it cures cancer and you will find the love of your life. And you know, like these other things too, like the video that we saw. So we're modeling the language usage, but also too, when we give that little bit of extra into the video, it makes things a lot more fun for students. Goodbye, I think they already left, but so yeah, so I think shaking it up too. So not just always letter writing or, you know, creating a video at home. Doing voiceovers is really fun for students because they can take a video then and like, if it didn't go well for them, like what would you wish this person had said? And they get really interested in that too. So, and all the projects and assignments, they're based off of what we read in the book. Again, sometimes only tangentially. So for instance, I mentioned the shisha thing. We watched a video that claimed that smoking shisha for 1 hour is equal to smoking 200 cigarettes. And is that really true? And so then we made students do a PSA video of the dangers of smoking shisha and why it's bad for you. And then we had them like argue for and against, like, should smoking age be moved up to 21 like it was, or should we keep it at 18? Or is this a freedom issue and, you know, we should all smoke? And when it comes to these kinds of opinions, I separate students. I say, you're the pro-smoking group and you're the anti-smoking group and you're the pro-21 and over group. And you're the people who say it should be totally illegal. And then they have to debate there too. Because but for the record, if you go political, don't force people into like being the Israeli delegation or something that's sensitive. Because if you have a family who is Palestinian, whose brother was killed by the IDF, you're not going to want to pretend to be pro-Israeli. That's very painful for some people. So if you want to separate students into groups and give them opinions, my very strong advice is to make sure it's something lighthearted, like does oregano cure cancer? I mean, you know, something like this. That's a little bit more mild. So quality sustained practice, am I getting it right? Do you have some more examples for such practice? This is a hard one because you know, I showed the FSI chart where, you know, you need 2,200 hours for Arabic, but it has to be quality. And not every day is quality. So I always tell students, make intentional language choices because every second is so precious. But that gets really exhausting for teachers as well. And today was not a quality day for me. I'm going to admit it. I didn't do a very good job in third year Arabic today. And I want to say too, this year, I'm not actually reading this book with my students because for me post-COVID, I mean, the students who are studying Arabic now in advanced Arabic had their first year online on Zoom. And they're not at the level of previous years, I think, as a result of this. And we also have some classroom dynamics that make students it hard for them to talk to each other. And this is not a fault of any teacher. Sometimes it just happens where you have that student who's maybe a little bit of a challenge and it sort of drags the rest of the class down despite our best efforts. And so that person showed up today and didn't do the homework and was very mad about it because we were workshopping it and it wasn't a quality day. But we have to give ourselves time to just say, okay, reevaluate, reflect what went wrong, what could I have done better as a teacher? How could I redo this for next year? And so this is how I know if it's if I'm getting it right. We see students engaged, interested, like the question we asked at the start of the day. Do I feel like everybody learned something new? And this is, and some days it's like, no, I didn't. So I always take a couple of minutes right after class or right at the end of the school day to reflect. Sometimes it takes 5, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, but I make a note, and I make a note in Google Drive, because a lot of people are like, I use Post-it notes. Or I print out my lesson plan or that kind of thing. I lose those pieces of paper and I can't find it next year. And so I've got Google Drive for me. This is how I organize content-based learning, especially. I organize it by, I've got a calendar view, and then I've got it by week, and then every day. And people are like, but you don't teach, in university, it's easier to take a step back and do that. I say, even those days I'm teaching at the high school, at the end of the day, I write down what went well and what should I continue doing, and what went wrong and what should I never do again. Because we think we're going to remember, and a year goes by and we don't remember until that same mistake happens again. So quality, sustainable practice, like as anything worth doing is worth doing poorly, but we have to recognize then it was like, could have gone better, and then write a little note, and then next year it gets better, and it gets better and better and better. I learned a lot from the experience that we had of emergency online teaching, emergency remote teaching via COVID. It wasn't all bad. And there's a lot of really wonderful things I think that came out of it, like us meeting today on Zoom. This has become so normal now, and it's amazing. I think it's amazing, like what wonderful opportunities for us. Having said that, there were some days that did not go well. And our students we didn't push them hard enough from my perspective, because I think we couldn't, because mentally we were all having a breakdown. It's easy to look back now and say, well, we're going to come out of it okay. But March 2020, we didn't even know what the symptoms of COVID were. We were all very worried about supply chains and, this kind of thing. So we have to give ourselves the grace too, to realize, okay, it's fine. Some days it's fine to leave good enough alone.
Yeah, that's true. Thank you so much, Heather. I see teachers saying thank you. This is awesome. I do have one more question. Do you have some suggestions for teachers who want to start content-based instruction, but not yet?
Yes, this is a great question. So brainstorm. I had some time today, hopefully start to play ideas off yourself, off each other, maybe, okay, I'm brainstorming essential questions. I went to a great conference. They talked about framing a classroom around essential questions. And I just loved that idea. And I'm like, oh, this is really content-based teaching in so many ways too. It's not just a topic like food, but what does a family eat in a week? And then you could even build on other stuff of that too, like community practice, like go volunteer at a food shelter, something like this, all of these things together. So I, as a teacher, would start doing that and start doing it little by little and arranging things in weeks, reading new books and reading new ideas, reading recipes, making recipes at home, and have it be something fun for you too. I say focus on the students and pick a topic that's interesting to students, but make sure it's at least a little bit interesting for you too, because students can tell when we're being phony. We pretend that they're not, but they can tell when when we're not into the lesson, they're not going to be either. So yeah, start little by little. Take some time in the summertime if you have summers off. Not all of us do. And some of us just want to break anyways. But yes, take it little by little, start writing down ideas, and sometimes just jump in. It's okay, because that's how we learn, is by doing too. So step number one, frame an essential question. What's an inequality that you see in your own target language culture issue that you wish more people knew about? Make that your content, and just try it for maybe 2 weeks. Another thing too, I forgot to mention this, so many of us are tied to our textbooks. We're expected in our districts to go through a textbook. So how can we force a content onto our textbook? I've found that every textbook that I've used, I shouldn't say that. There's not a whole lot of textbooks in Arabic, okay? There just aren't that many. And the ones that are out there are not super great. But you can take the things that are embedded in a chapter and sort of tease out that content and make that the point of the lesson. And then the grammar, the language, the pronunciation, everything else will follow that. Inshallah, as they say, God willing. But yeah, don't be afraid to start, and don't be afraid to get it wrong, because nothing's perfect.
Yeah, thank you for the good suggestion. I think sometimes like you said, their textbook and their fixed curriculum, everybody need to do the same thing, kind of,
Right.
Restricted everybody. We want to try something new, but how? So that's always our challenge. Do you have some ideas about how to, for example, we have fixed curriculum, mandated curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
In that case, can you give some example or some suggestions that how teachers can do at least bring some content-based learning into the topic.
Sure. So I guess my counter question would be, for this mandated curriculum, is it based on ACTFL's can-do statements, or is it more grammar-based, or is it more textbook-based? I mean, that's where we'd have to start.
Yeah, I think a lot of school districts, they have like topic-based, so they have premise aligned to their topics, like theme-based. Yeah,
That's great.
don't know.
Yeah, if it's theme-based, it's so much easier. For many Arabic teachers, this is a big issue because there's one book that everybody uses, and if you don't use this book and you go study at a different place, you're in trouble because everybody follows this book that's not theme-based. It's not based on any like can-do statements. It's none of this. Then we have a theme-based. So let's say our theme is, I can talk about my family. So then we can take that and change it to not just I can talk about my family or a family, but what do families look like all over the world, not just in my target language and culture, but elsewhere. And then ask more pointed questions like why, like for the family tree, do we use family trees here? Make your own family tree. Why is this important in my target culture? Why are only the men included in the Middle East on a family tree? And we can create family trees then for pretend families, because again, this gets a little bit tricky because I think most of us have like a family tree kind of a thing, or a family unit, I should say. We can expand that to, incorporate more outside of the box to make sure that students still get that very important grammar and vocabulary that they need, but also reframing it in a different kind of conversation. Or I just had another thought too. It's gone now. Daily schedule. It seems like every single curriculum that I've seen seems to have this over focus on a daily schedule. It's everywhere. I know we've seen this in like the actual can-do statements. I'm like, do middle schoolers really talk about their daily schedule that much? They don't know what they do during the day because everything's so dictated to them. But it's such a part of our lesson. So I changed it to, create a TikTok account about your daily schedule. And we do that instead, and find other influencers and what is their schedule like and how is it different from yours? And then suddenly it becomes super interesting to them. So we're still getting that vital information, but now we've got that crucial missing part in so many ways, which is the interest of the students and what they want to. Sometimes we really do have to think outside of the box, and we can't maybe spend as much time on the content that we wanted, but we still can kind of tweak it to ask these more essential questions, like what is this influencer doing that's different from me? Or what is this princess that's doing that's different from me? There's a lot of princesses throughout the Middle East. Or what is this person who has to sell gum on the streets doing that's different from me? And then people start to ask questions about their own lives and see how privileged a lot of people really are in the United States as a result. I see also too, what does a typical subject include? What do you do after the essential question? What do you do after that? It's like backwards design at its finest. So I saw an issue for me, like students were hungry for information about Israel and Palestine, and we had nothing here at the university to provide them. And so I started here, but I can't say like the essential question is, we don't want to start with the leading essential question. Like, why is Palestine oppressed? Like, we don't want to start with that because not everybody feels that way. So instead I said, what are we missing out on when we only hear a single story? That's the essential question. So I kind of did a little bit backwards in that sense. But then when we frame our whole discussion about Israel and Palestine, where's the bias? What are we missing out on? What didn't we hear in this story? What was specifically ignored? And so then, then I choose like a book or a movie or something like that. And then when I watch that movie, I tease out different things. Like they just mentioned something here off the cuff, like about, lemons and how lemons don't grow here. And then we can talk about lemons for a little bit and then tease things out in that way. So picking or like in the textbook, we're reading a young adult novel, but what if you have a textbook to work off of and you have to do the textbook? Tease something out of those textbooks and see what you can get then too. And then get down to the nitty gritty, because if we want to start off like, okay, students have to learn my mom, how do I build a lesson out of that? It gets kind of boring. But if we build a lesson more of, let's talk about the royal family in Britain, for instance, even though Great Britain has nothing to do with the Middle East, people are a little bit more interested. And then we can maybe bring in the Jordanian royal family. So starting from something that students are a little bit maybe familiar with, really, really helps. So you can build larger and then get down smaller and smaller and smaller. Or sometimes like, yeah, you're forced to use a textbook. So start with there and then tease things out there. And then think what might be fun for students. Anything, any chance they had to be creative, students really, really like. So yeah, write a letter from this person to that person. Create a horror movie. I mean, if you have a student, sometimes all our classrooms are different every year. I had a student population once who loved Halloween. They were always talking about horror movies. So I said, okay, create a horror movie. This main character died. You find the body. What happens next? Boy, they really got into it. The year after that, I
They're
did
so creative.
Yeah, right.
Thank you so much. Any other questions? It's almost time. I mean, the time. Yeah.
I'm gonna put my email in chat in case anybody has any questions later on or wants feedback or anything like this. Please consider me a resource. I'm happy to help.
Thank you.
Yeah. It's my pleasure to be here. So thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you. I really appreciate your ideas. You are so creative. Thank you for sharing your ideas and all the great stories from your class.
I think we have all learned a lot from you. So we want to digest those thoughts.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you. Yes. And again, if anybody has any questions later on or something they wish they'd asked, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm here for everybody. Because a lot of these ideas are not mine. They came from other people and other conferences I've attended and webinar sessions and everything else. So what's really creativity is me just stealing other people's ideas.
Stealing is a kind of creativity as well.
Collaborating.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all for participating and coming to the webinar, and we really appreciate your support. Thanks, Heather, again for the great seminar. Thank you.
It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. And I'll be in Nebraska again. I forgot to mention this earlier at the, what is it, NILA, I think it is?
Yeah, NILA, Nebraska International Language Association annual meeting, and Heather as their keynote speaker for us.
So come if you want to continue the conversation. Yeah, please. I hope to see everybody there.
Yeah, thank you. And everybody, thank you for participating and have a nice evening. Thank you. Heather, see you soon.
Bye. Take care, everybody. Thank you so much.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.哦，刘老师，那个于老师说他那个下周星期三可以帮我。
哦，太好了，太好了，行，
谢谢你，谢谢你，非常感谢。
很好，很好，你这个活动非常好，以后我们那个有机会再合作。嗯，
啊，行，好，谢谢，你先忙。好，拜拜。
啊，
谢谢，
再见，